It all began on a rainy evening in a grand ballroom filled with glittering chandeliers, laughter, and the clinking of expensive wine glasses. The city's elite had gathered to celebrate the launch of a new luxury hotel owned by one of the most powerful businessmen, Arman Malik. Cameras flashed as he walked in, tall, composed, wearing the kind of confidence that only success and money could buy. But among the crowd of sparkling gowns and polished shoes stood a woman whose trembling hands and old uniform told a very different story. Her name was Sarah. Sarah worked as a waitress at the event, invisible, unnoticed, and exhausted. Life had been a long chain of hardships for her: her father's illness, her mother's death, and the debt that swallowed their tiny home had left her clinging to any job she could find. Yet tonight, fate had placed her right in front of the man who had once promised her forever. The same man now celebrated as someone else's husband. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and true love beyond money, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your small act helps spread powerful stories that touch hearts. Sarah hadn't seen Arman in 5 years. Once, he was her everything. A man who dreamed of building an empire, but also wanted to build a small world with her. They had planned a simple life, where love mattered more than luxury. But dreams often collide with reality. Arman's business failed back then, and when his father died, he chose ambition over love. He disappeared one day without goodbye, leaving Sarah with shattered promises and unpaid rent. Now, as she carried a tray of drinks across the hall, her eyes met his. For just a second, time froze. The laughter around her faded, the music became distant, and her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. Arman's expression flickered, a flash of recognition, guilt, and something deeper. But standing beside him was Mira, his wife, the elegant, graceful woman every magazine called the perfect millionaire's wife. Mira's charm filled the room. She greeted guests with poise, her diamond necklace catching every light. No one could guess that behind that calm smile was a woman fighting her own silent battles. She had married Arman 2 years ago, a marriage that was more of a merger than a union. What people didn't know was that Mira had been diagnosed with a heart condition that left her weak and fragile, yet she never complained. She carried herself with dignity, even when love was the one thing missing in her perfect life. As the night went on, Sarah tried to stay invisible, but destiny had other plans. A guest bumped into her, spilling a glass of red wine onto Mira's pristine white gown. The room gasped. Sarah froze in horror, her tray clattering to the floor. Everyone stared. The staff, the guests, the photographers. Arman stepped forward, anger flashing across his face. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice cut through the silence like a knife. Sarah trembled, her eyes filling with tears. She opened her mouth to apologize, but her voice broke before she could speak. And then, the impossible happened. Mira placed a hand gently on Arman's arm and said softly, "Stop." Her voice, though quiet, carried weight. She turned to Sarah, looked into her eyes, and smiled. A tired, knowing smile. Then she said the words that made the entire room fall into a stunned silence. "Tell him I'm your wife." Everyone froze. Arman's expression turned to shock. The crowd began whispering. Sarah looked utterly confused. Mira, the millionaire's wife, stood calmly, her voice unwavering. "Tell him I'm your wife," she repeated, "because no woman should be humiliated for an accident, and no man should forget what kindness means." The silence that followed was deafening. Arman looked between the two women, the woman he once loved and the woman who had just stood up for her with unexpected grace. Mira took off her diamond shawl and wrapped it around Sarah's shoulders. "Accidents happen," she said softly, "but cruelty is a choice." Her words rippled through the hall, leaving every person present quietly stunned. Arman's anger melted into shame. He turned away, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. The event ended awkwardly, the lights dimming early as guests whispered about what had just happened. Later that night, Mira found Sarah outside the hotel, sitting on the steps, tears mingling with raindrops. She sat beside her, not as a millionaire's wife, but as a woman who understood pain. "You loved him once, didn't you?" Mira asked gently. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "I still do," she whispered, "even when I don't want to." Mira smiled faintly. "Love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means forgiving and letting go with peace." She paused. "He wasn't always like this. The world changed him. Success blinded him. Maybe tonight was his reminder." Sarah looked at her, surprised by the compassion in her eyes. Mira wasn't arrogant or distant. She was kind, humble, and heartbreakingly human. "Why did you defend me?" Sarah asked quietly. "Because," Mira said, her gaze distant, "I know what it feels like to be small in a room full of power, to be blamed for things you didn't mean, and maybe because deep down I wish someone had defended me once." Sarah's eyes filled again, but this time with something softer. Gratitude. The two women sat together in silence, the city lights shimmering in puddles before them. The days that followed changed everything. The video from that night went viral. The clip of Mira saying, "Tell him I'm your wife," spread across social media. People praised her humanity, her grace, her courage. Sarah was called by media outlets, but she refused interviews. She didn't want fame, she wanted peace. Arman, on the other hand, faced a storm within himself. He couldn't forget the look in Sarah's eyes, the mix of hurt and dignity. He couldn't forget his wife's words either. For the first time, he saw how far he had drifted from the man he used to be. One evening, he came home to find Mira sketching quietly by the window. Her face looked pale, weaker than usual. He walked to her slowly, guilt written all over him. "Why did you do that?" he asked softly. She smiled without looking up. "Because someone had to remind you what love looks like." He sat down beside her, realizing how blind ambition had cost him warmth, humanity, and connection. Mira coughed lightly, then placed her hand over his. "Arman," she whispered, "life is too short to let ego win. Find your peace before it's too late." That night, Mira collapsed. Her condition had worsened silently over months. Arman rushed her to the hospital, where doctors said her heart was too weak. For 3 days he stayed by her bedside, holding her hand, praying for a miracle. But on the 4th morning, Mira opened her eyes, smiled faintly, and said her last words, "Promise me, you'll be kind again." And then she was gone. The world mourned her, the woman who had taught millions a lesson about grace. Arman's empire continued, but he was no longer the same man. He donated part of his wealth to hospitals, opened a foundation in Mira's name, and started visiting the places he had once ignored, orphanages, shelters, and small clinics. Months later, he found himself standing at a small cafe near the sea, a cafe owned by none other than Sarah. She had left her job at the hotel and started a tiny business using the money Mira had secretly sent her before passing away. It was a note that came with it that broke Sarah's heart. "This is not charity. This is faith. Build something beautiful." When Arman entered the cafe, Sarah looked up, her heart skipping a beat. He looked tired, older, but gentler. There was no arrogance in his eyes, only remorse. "I came to thank you," he said softly, "for forgiving me, and for reminding me of who I was." Sarah smiled faintly. "I didn't remind you," she said. She did. They both looked toward the small portrait of Mira hanging near the window, her smiling face surrounded by flowers. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Arman placed a donation envelope on the counter. "Use this to expand the cafe," he said. "Let it be a place where people find warmth when the world turns cold." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Only if you promise to come back. Not as a millionaire, but as a friend." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it was genuine. "I promise." Months passed, and the cafe became a haven for many, the lonely, the tired, the broken. On the door hung a simple wooden board that read, "Be kind. Someone might be fighting a battle you can't see." Every evening, Sarah would light a candle under Mira's portrait, whispering a thank you to the woman who had once said, "Tell him I'm your wife." because those words had not only silenced a room, they had awakened a soul.